I know you've got an ear out for the start of the podcast, but before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to remind you to keep an eye out for Darrell Lee's limited edition Christmas treats, because they're in stores now. Like the iconic Christmas nougat pudding, so yummy and a gorgeous little gift. And some delicious Chrissy-themed twists on your favourite treats, like the Darrell Lee Rockley Road with chewy red and green jelly pieces, green and red crunchy milk chocolate balls, my favourites, and green apple and strawberry flavoured licorice. Watch them disappear. Your Christmas treats table will pop with colour and scrumptiousness. Spread some joy, bring the fun, and enjoy the Christmas tradition that is Darrell Lee. Hurry before they sell out. Darrell Lee makes Christmas better. This is The 5 of My Life with me, Nigel Marsh. The series where I talk to notable people about 5 of their defining things. The way it works is my guests always choose a favourite film, book, song, place and possession. They tell me their choices in advance so I can research them, but they don't tell me why they've chosen them. That's the subject of our conversation. The reason I devised this series is I wanted to create a slightly different way to gain an insight into the real lives and thoughts of prominent people. Peter FitzSimons spins some fabulous yarns in a manner that only he can. In this lively and energising conversation, I learn more about what drives the man to write books of great Australian history. Peter FitzSimons.
Nigel Marsh, here we are.
Welcome to The 5 of My Life. I want to know, from a man who is not short of an opinion and a bit of certainty, is how did you find the decision-making process to come up with your 5? Was it easy for you? Just bang?
Yes, no, that came very easily.
So what FitzSimons has done is he's messed with the format, because for the first time in 5 of My Life history, he's chosen a film, the name of which he doesn't know.
Well, there's several. Well, the one that really, I remember it now, the one that absolutely blew me away, if it marked my life, if that's the thing of,
You were 7 years old.
That's it. That's the one with my mum. And we were up at the farm and we would get, so we have a farm about an hour north of Sydney called Pete's Ridge, and we would get the television set. We would rent a black and white television every 2 years, Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games. We'd have it for 10 days. So for those 10 days, I'd be completely absorbed, and so the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games would finish at whatever time it was. And then one night, Mum and I don't know why she let me stay up, but we were watching this black and white film, and I can still see what happened. And there was this old man and this weeping, beautiful young girl, maybe 16 or 17 years old, and she was weeping over some unhappiness. And this old man in this English accent says, my dear, you must understand that the force of life which makes the flowers bloom and the trees grow and the birds sing is the same force of life that is in you. You must suck the juice from the marrow of life and let it run down your chin. And it was just, that's not the exact words because I've Googled those words and they don't come up, they only come up under me writing about it. And I've talked to Doug Anderson, who you might remember was the great film, like the great knowledge about films. And I've talked to who else? Not Bill Collins, but there's been other people I've approached over the years.
To try and find the name of the film.
To try and find it.
Do you know what? I found the nearest thing.
Yeah, go on.
But it's Henry David Thoreau, who I adore, has a quote which is, I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. I wanted to live deep and suck all the marrow of life.
There we go.
And that was from Dead Poets Society, which is after this. So it's not. It couldn't have been.
Look,
Dead Poets.
It may be that I'm melding together various memories, but certainly that thing of this old man talking to this young girl, and the theme was that the force of life that makes the birds sing is the same, and flowers bloom is the same force of life in you. Don't be downbeat, don't be depressed, and you'll have bad days, but Jesus, how good is life?
Don't
suck it up
slowly to the edge of your grave. Skid in sideways, going woohoo,
and leave a good-looking. What is it? Leave a good-looking corpse. Is that the one?
Yeah. So tell me, mate, how has that played out in your life? What have been the in the different eras of your life? You've got the suck the marrow out of life, juice dripping down your skin. What have been the downsides as well as the upsides of that approach to life?
No, somebody close to me who'll remain nameless. Let's just call him my elder brother David. Said to me, David's 13 years older than me, and he helps me with my books. He's a great proofreader. He's got a very short attention span. So when he goes through with a red pen and he goes, I don't care, zzz, I know, all right, that's a good sign. But David said to me that if he had a car accident tomorrow and died, he'd go to his grave fairly happy because he's had a great life. And I hope these words are not recalled at my funeral a week from now. But I haven't had a particular plan for a life. You know, it's just everything's just sort of things happen. But I would say there were two men that I met, glancing acquaintance with both, that had a big influence on me. When I was 19 years old, my third book was called Hitchhiking for Ugly People. And it was sort of the experiences of hitchhiking around Australia and through Africa and so forth. But
for ugly people?
Oh, it was just because that was a clever title.
Yeah, but you were a beautiful young man.
I was a beautiful young man.
You were a
That was
good
before
looker.
10 years of football took over. But when I was travelling, I hitchhiked around Australia, and I met two men in the space of 4 days that sort of had a bit of an influence on me. And one was a guy. My long lost cousins lived in number 30 Cersei Circle, Dalkeith in Perth. And so I knocked on the door. They sort of knew I was coming. I hadn't washed in, 6 or 7 days across the Nullarbor. They said, yes, come this way, bathroom's here. We'll get you some towels. And, sort of scrubbed me up a little bit. And that night they took me out. And I met a man that he owned the only service station on the Nullarbor, which I'd passed through, and he was living a good life. And, I didn't particularly warm to him, but he had 5 children and he had a tennis court and a house and I just looked at that and I thought, yep, I want children. I'd like children. I want to marry like this guy's married. I'd like a tennis court, in terms of, I don't know, just because I'd grown up on a tennis court. So basically meeting him confirmed looking at a man that was not my father and say, yep, I want to live like that. And the other one was a guy that was about 40 years old and he married a woman that was about 30 years old. And all through his 20s, he had travelled the world and done different things. And I thought, and I remember he had a 4-year-old daughter. And I just remember thinking, yep, that's what I want to do. In my 20s, I want to kick around. And so that's basically what I did. I kicked around in my 20s. I went to this I went to this place in Italy, Rovigo, south of Venice, just south of Venice, played rugby there for a season. And there met, I guess, the third man, Milto Baratella, who was an architect. Si tu vuoi in casa bella, chiamare Baratella, who was this fantastic man who was the first man I'd ever met that cooked. I was just like, wow, he cooked. And at the age of 56, he'd never hit the thing of a piano, and he'd learnt to play the piano at the age of 56 and played it like a maestro at 65. And I looked at the way he lived his life. And what I say to my sons and my daughter is, at your age, look up, look to people and look how they live their lives. And you'll see things that you absolutely admire, and you'll see things where you go, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll tell you what, I am not going to live like that.
Your second choice, you have chosen, so you may have messed with my format on your film without having a title. You haven't messed with the format for your book, but you have chosen a book about kidnap and rape. Whew, brave, cool, I love it. The Fan Club, Irving Wallace, 1974. Justify yourself, man.
Yeah, well, it was, again, I'm referring to other people that you'll probably know. Bill Leake, do you remember Bill Leake? He was a very hard right-wing cartoonist at The Australian. Not my favourite cartoons, frankly, but he was a wonderful man, Bill. He was a great friend of mine in the early 90s, and when he was at the Herald, and I kept in touch with him, and we were still friends when he died. When Bill told me once that when he was 13 or 14, he was at this art gallery because he just had art in his bones, and he was looking at this Rembrandt, and the guide, it was down in Canberra, and the guide had said, well, some people say that this painting by Rembrandt is not necessarily all of it by Rembrandt. It might be done, one of my students might have done it. Bill said, I was 14 years old, I looked at it and he moved on, I looked on, well, of course that elbow wasn't done by Rembrandt, and you can see the way he's done the chin. That's not the way Rembrandt does a chin. Anyway, Bill's point was, at the age of 14, he had an instinctive understanding of art and beyond his years, and for whatever reason, at the age of 12, all my older brothers and sisters were always reading books, as were Mum and Dad. And, they were probably reading worthier, more intellectually challenging books. And I liked Irving Wallace, Pot Boilers. And I would devour every Irving Wallace book and I would think, well, why is his stuff so compelling? So I deconstructed it and I'd look at it. And the way that Irving Wallace would tell a story would be he'd have 4 strands running parallel to each other. And it would always start with a beautiful blonde in the kitchen. And she was absolutely gorgeous, and she was doing this and she was doing that, and she was just untying the button of her. When there's a knock on the door, you go, hey, just wait. What happened after she undid the top button and the knock on the door? And he would leave you there, and then he'd start on a different story, and there'd be something, and there'd be a shot in the distance. Well, what? And then you'd go to 3 or 4, and then finally you'd get back to the blonde who'd undone the top button.
Parallel storylines.
Parallel storylines pushing towards a climax that usually came with 2 pages to go, and it all came together. And that had a huge influence on me when I started doing my own books, because it's a way of storytelling where you keep the narrative moving. And so you're looking for, I did my book on Kokoda, which was my breakthrough book in terms of, I suppose, sales, which has now done 320,000 copies. You've got the Australians pushing one way, you've got the Japanese pushing the other way, so you can do the parallel storylines so long as you get enough information from the Japanese side of things.
So I have recently finished your book on Breaker Moran.
What did you think of the book?
I loved it, but the thing, I didn't like him at all.
No.
I hated him. I'm still upset about Lieutenant Annan.
Yes.
I
love it that you love him.
So the Battle of Ellen's River.
Yeah.
I can't recommend the book highly enough, but you're Australia's most successful non-fiction writer, but I love the art of being able to do a page turner. But on the parallel storylines, there are some writers who haven't got a sure enough hand on that. So if I want to know what happens to the blonde with the rose between her teeth, right, and you go to a different story, but you go on too long, not interestingly enough, I'm thinking, well, bloody hell, I want to get back to the...
Yes.
Yeah. So it's an art. It's not as easy as you make it sound. I mean, you do it beautifully, but...
It's not easy, but I love the fact that you love James Annan, because what's he got to do with Breaker Moran? Nothing. Nothing at all. I don't care. It's a cracker story. And when I came across his diary entries and the letter from his widow, it leaps from the page. Who was this guy? They all loved him. He was the one that kept them all safe from the battle. The one that really got me onto the Battle of Ellen's River, to just describe that broadly, you had about 300 Australians, 200 Rhodesians and English atop this hill, surrounded by 2,000 or 3,000 Boers. And they had artillery and they pounded them. And the Australians had, among others, they had coal miners who knew what to do. So when the sun goes down on the first day, and the detail, what about the detail where they have these donkeys and these horses? And one of the details is one of the bits of shrapnel comes and neatly takes out the spine of this horse. So they're watching, the shells fall among the horses, they're screaming and winning, but one of the pieces of shrapnel neatly takes off the spine, and the whole carcass of the horse just goes flat. And I remember that as a detail. But that night, the coal miners get going and they dig the trenches and they get underground. And the story that I love there is, after 3 or 4 days of this, the Boer general sends in an emissary to say, we've got you surrounded. You got to give up. We're going to blow the shitter out of you. At which point Colonel Horde, the English colonel, says, and I love these words, he says, you don't understand. Even if I wanted to surrender, and I don't, even if I did, if I went up back to the top of the hill and I told the Australians we surrender, those bastards would slit my throat. We don't surrender, and they didn't. When I go into the books, I like to use my ignorance as a tool. I generally start totally ignorant, and I think, well, if I don't know that, the building blocks of this story, it's a good chance a lot of the readers won't. So I put the building blocks into the story so you understand. For example, when I did Kokoda, I didn't know how many were in a platoon, a battalion or a division. So as I'm telling the story, I make sure that there's an explanation that one of the characters, who equally didn't know, understands as he goes along. And so with Breaker Moran, I go into it thinking this guy was a great guy. He was part Banjo Patterson, he was part man from Snowy River, and he was cruelly put up against the wall by those pommy bastards.
And oh my, don't spoiler alert, but gosh, that isn't how you end up thinking when you finish your wonderful book. Your third choice is a song. You have chosen, it's the third choice by Bob Dylan. Your colleague at the Herald, Kate McClymont, chose Like a Rolling Stone.
Yep.
Ronnie Kahn chose A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. And you chose Hurricane from Bob's 17th studio album.
You'll be doing society a favour. That son of a bitch is brave and getting braver. And my brother had a tape, those 45-minute tapes of Desire. And when I was at Knox, which is a fairly, very privileged elite boys' school, et cetera, very conservative, very white, very Presbyterian, very, we didn't have the term white privilege at the time, but looking back, very white privileged. And it was, I started listening to this album and I'd get to this thing of Dylan singing Son of a Bitch is Brave, and there was an anger to it. There was a naughtiness to the words. And I played it again and again before I moved into the rest of the album. And it's fantastic. And my son, who's a very good writer, also has Dylan in his bones. And the lesson of Dylan is words do not have to make sense technically. You can't break them down and so to make them make sense sometimes. It's the formation of the words that can generate the feeling. And that for me is the Dylan is in my bones, and it's the way I want to live. I love colourful characters. All of Dylan's songs are filled with colourful characters.
Have you listened to his...
Of course I have. I've listened to everything.
No. His Nobel Prize winning speech.
Yes, of course.
So in that...
Patti Smith singing.
He quotes the John Donne poem.
Yep.
And then when he's finished quoting it, he says, I don't know what it means either, but it sounds good.
Whenever I do books in areas that I'm not expert in, which is every book, I like to find the most, not pedantic's not the right word, but certainly the most expert. So when I did the book on Ned Kelly, there was a guy called Ian Jones, 86 years old, who'd studied Ned since the age of 7. No joking. That's where he went to the Victoria Library. He just devoured it. And when I finished the book, I go to Ian and say, look, here's a red pen. Here's my manuscript, please. And anyway, Ian, as highly revered as Ian was, there was another one that Ned Kelly is awash with Ned Kelly nutters. Australia is awash with Ned Kelly nutters, most of whom hate each other, 3/4 of whom acknowledge Ian as the oracle, but all of whom acknowledge this woman living called Sharon Hollingsworth. And she was the one they all went, yeah, well, she's the one. Who is she? She's a woman that lives in North Carolina in a trailer park. Has she ever been to Australia? No. But in the age of the internet, she'd come across Ned Kelly in the early days of the internet, and there wasn't enough hours in the day. And so, anyway, after Ian had gone through it, I go and send it to her. 48 hours later, it comes back with my 24 errors that she'd spotted and all documented. When I tried to pay her, she didn't want to take a cent because that would sort of sully what she was doing. So I ended up sending her a new computer so she didn't have to go to the local library. But in the age of the internet, the information is out there and it's deep. But, with serious researchers, you can get to the truth of the matter.
So question for you, Peter. Is Dylan famous for writing protest songs at his early career? You've got a platform, many, many platforms. Talk to us about the responsibilities you feel with that platform.
I want to be at the forefront of progressivism.
Right.
I mentioned the Republic movement. I have a very simple premise on that. Australia can do better in the 21st century than find our heads of state from a family of pommy aristocrats living in a palace in London. How hard is this? Yeah. And so I things like, I suppose, if I'm proud of things that I've, pushed, I'm proud of that. I'm certainly proud of pushing very strongly same-sex marriage. For me, climate change, I wish I knew more. I know we're in deep shit. I know we've got to do more. In sport, the thing that I push hardest is concussion. The fellow that you admire, we both admire, Sir Michael Parkinson, came out to Australia 2 or 3 years ago, and he had a thing at the Opera House, which was vignettes of the best interviews. And he had 4 vignettes from Muhammad Ali. And the first vignette, beautiful young black man, 67 years old, in 1967. I have wrestled with an alligator for this fight. I have tussled with a whale, handcuffed lightning, put thunder in jail. Bad, fast. Why, only last week I murdered a rock, injured a brick. I'm so bad I'll make medicine look sick. Bad, fast. And just, wow. 4 years later, he's the angry young black man, activist. Them Viet Cong never called me the N-word, and he's angry. 77, when he interviews him, he's starting to slur his words. And then in 1981 and 1982, just on the eve of him fighting Larry Holmes in his last fight, there is Muhammad, and he's speaking like, and you come away devastated, angry, because, who killed Muhammad? We killed Muhammad. I killed Muhammad because we loved him so much. We so much loved to see him fighting. We were still saying, yeah, Muhammad, get in, you're whatever, however old you are, 36 years old. And when Muhammad Ali, goes down with Parkinson's disease, so-called, whatever it was, everybody says it's Parkinson's disease. It could have happened to anyone, or it was the spray they put on the Mexican training camp, or it's the most famous man in the world. Of course, he retreated inside himself. Nobody wanted
700 punches in the head.
Nobody wanted to say the truth. This guy was in the ring with the baddest men on the planet for 20 years, and he got hit in the head and it rattled his brain and it killed him. That's what happened.
So your fourth choice on Find My Life, your location, is your farm, mate. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, Mum and Dad, after Mum served in the Second World War as a physio cum nurse putting back together wounded soldiers, and she was a rich girl from Urunga and Dad was a poor boy from Urunga, and they'd known each other for a while, but they both came back from the war, got together, and then Dad, went picking oranges. He was well educated, but he had a very bad back. I don't know if it was from the war or whatever it was, maybe fast bowling and cricket. But the advice was to get over your bad back, you're going to have to work outdoors. So they bought 60 acres of farmland up at Pete's Ridge, and they ended up growing. They ended up growing oranges, lemons, tomatoes, and children. And I was the seventh of those children. And we had this. They say if you had a happy life, you remember the sun shining. If you had an unhappy life, you remember wet Wednesday afternoons trudging home from school. Well, when I look back on life on that farm, the sun was shining. And when Mum died, Dad died in 92, we buried him where he dropped, the ashes where he dropped on the farm, put a big block of granite there and planted a tree. And we buried Mum 2 years later, 50 yards up the hill in the most beautiful spot of the farm.
Is that where you're going to go?
That's exactly right. And I lay down there when we visit, we go up to the farm fairly regularly. And I actually, with my eldest son, Jake, about 3 years ago, there was a little sunny little spot about 30 yards over from Mum and 50 yards up from Dad.
That's the place.
I lay down in the sunlight and I said, Jake, you got it? Remember this. This will do me. And, the tree that you put it. But it's a thing of, when Mum died, we were gathered around the bed as she breathes her last. Before she goes, one of her lines, she said, as I leave you, it wasn't actually as articulate as this. It was more, she was in pain, but bowel cancer and the whole thing. But she said, as I go, I'm nourished by the fact that I know you will all look after each other. And we have, and we look after each other's children. And our children look after each other. And for me, that is what a family is. And it came from life on that farm, looking after each other. And, every now and then one of our children might be in some kind of crisis. And, everybody, brothers and sisters, red alert. This is the issue. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Without being intrusive, but it's helpful. But that farm is the spiritual holy land for me. And Mum, before she died, she was on the P&C, and CWA and all this sort of stuff. And must have been about 1990, she was doing a stall in Man Street, Gosford, and she was there all day. And the final thing selling was this horrible, muddy sculpture. It's like crystallized mud sculpture of a warrior, medieval soldier on a horse. Anyway, at the end of the day, last thing left, nobody would buy it. So Mum puts down her own $10, brings him home, a horrible little fellow. And when she dies, we go, well, what are we going to put on Mum's grave beside the big block of rock? So we put the soldier there on his thing, and 5th of July, 94, she died, established the grave 6 months later. I suppose 4 years later, the soldier's right arm fell off, and then his left arm fell off, and then his horse is on his knees. And as the years go by, it'll be ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But I always say to my family, look, everything's going well in my life. But if ever I disappeared, if ever I was in a crisis to beat all crisis and you wanted to know where to find me, you'll find me at the farm. probably beside Mum and the Soldier.
It's beautiful hearing you talk about it, mate. It's just wonderful. Your possession on Five of My Life, Tesla.
Oh, yes, what a wank. What did I actually...
I'm not saying anything. Not saying anything.
Did I actually write that?
You wrote, I love my Tesla because it goes very fast and women wink at me.
Did I write that?
No, not the last bit.
No, I know. Look, I know I should say it was something my mother gave me or my mother, but it just happened. I wrote that quickly, and the truth of it is I do love it. I absolutely love it. And I'm not a car person. So I've never understood, obsession with cars and things like that. But when I was sort of wanting to go electric, big friends came to us in 2001 and they said, we've got a Prius outside. We said, what's a Prius? And then, I'd heard all the things about Tesla, so I thought I'll take it for a test drive. And it's just like, what? I mean, I wrote a piece about it.
Fast and quiet.
Yeah, and I wrote a piece about it inside, I don't know what my model is, but it's it's the big one, the fast one, whatever it is. And it's got three speeds: chill, sports, ludicrous, and the fourth speed is ludicrous plus. And it can go from 0 to 100 in 2.16 seconds. And my theorem on that, and if anybody does buy a Tesla, be warned, inside every sober-suited 58-year-old man, there is an 18-year-old hoon with a mullet trying to get out.
Your last traditional question on Five of My Life is, who would you like to hear on Five of My Life next, Peter, and why?
If you could get this person.
Yeah.
You won't. Because
I want to challenge accepted, whoever it is, as long as they're not dead.
No, they're not dead. The obvious person that I'd want to do this person if I could possibly, and I've tried and I've written to him, is obviously Dylan. Right. If you could, and I wrote to Dylan so last year before the plague descended, Lisa and I were in London. And we went to this is it Bond Street? There was this gallery that had Dylan artwork. I didn't know that Dylan was a painter. And anyway, we nearly bought one of the Dylan paintings until sanity set in and, we were crazy to try and pay that kind of money. But the guy was in touch with Dylan and I said, look, I'm a writer and that's it. And so here is the thing. If 400 years ago, somebody could have sat down with William Shakespeare for half a day and just wrote, who are you, where are you from, what are you about? How precious, how valuable would be 5 sentences on William Shakespeare from somebody that talked to him? How informative would it be? And I said, with Dylan, there's been all kinds of interviews and the rest, but he's never answered the questions if, attempted to seriously say where his genius come from or his formative experiences. And he wrote that book, The Chronicles, and 2 pages in, he spent 3/4 of a page on a home run hit by Babe Ruth. It was just, what? Yeah, okay, look, but Bob, get back to Duluth, get back to Minnesota. Where did you to do that? So for me, I wrote to Dylan's agent and said, look, somebody should do it. I would love to do it. And even if you put something on it which said, you'd search me before I go in, so I've got no recording devices. You make me sign something to say I can't write about it. Just somebody sit with Dylan for a day so that you get it down on tape, you put it in the Smithsonian vault. This can't be open till, 100 years after Bob's died. But for humanity, because Dylan is the Shakespeare of our time. There is Dylan and there is daylight.
I would love to hear his 5. Peter FitzSimons, thank you so much, mate. I know how busy you are for sharing your choices.
You barely let me get a word in edgeways. Thank you.
The Five of My Life was presented by me, Nigel Marsh. Producer, Alex Mitchell. Sound production and theme music by Darcy Thompson and Matt Nicholish.